"Dad, maybe you shouldn't come to the country club. It's not really your kind of place." Those were my daughter's exact words. No hesitation. No softening. Like she was doing me a favor by warning me not to embarrass myself. It wasn't a joke. I could see it in her eyes. The same look you'd give someone if they were about to walk into a black-tie gala wearing muddy boots. And before I go any further, if you're into real, raw stories about family, betrayal, and revenge, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next parts. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Back to that moment. I just stood there, holding the phone, stunned. I've been through war. I've had bullets crack past my head, seen brothers fall, rebuilt my life from nothing. But nothing hit me like hearing my own daughter say I wasn't fit to be seen with her husband's family. I asked her why. She danced around it, mumbling something about a certain dress code and the level of people there, as if I was some construction worker crashing a royal dinner. The irony? The country club was holding a special ceremony for the opening of a new veterans pavilion, a project I had personally funded for years. Not just contributed to, I kept it alive. Without my money, there wouldn't even be a pavilion. They were naming it after me. Me, the man who apparently wasn't country club material. I tried to laugh it off. "Sweetheart, I've been in tougher rooms than any club could offer." But her silence told me she wasn't convinced. And honestly, I wasn't sure if she even wanted to be. When the invitation came in the mail, thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering, I could almost hear her sigh from across the city. I could picture her telling her husband's family. Well, I told them not to come. That night, I poured myself a whiskey and stared at the invitation. Every part of me wanted to rip it up, prove her right, and avoid the humiliation. But another part of me, the stubborn, battle-tested part, decided something else. If they thought I didn't belong, I'd show up. And I'd make sure they remembered the day I walked into their precious club. The weeks before the event, I kept thinking about her tone. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was shame. Shame of me. That realization burned deeper than I wanted to admit. I've spent decades building a name for myself, not for fame, but for respect. And here was my own daughter, acting like I was some unpolished relic she had to hide from her refined in-laws. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was only going for the veterans, for the men and women I had served with and supported. But deep down, I knew I was also going to prove something, not just to her, but to everyone who thought their money, their titles, or their old family names made them better than me. The morning of the event, I shined my shoes until I could see my reflection. Picked a suit that fit like it was made for me. Not flashy, not screaming for attention, just sharp. The kind of sharp that says, "I've been places you wouldn't last a day in." When I arrived at the club, the valet hesitated for just a second before opening my door. I caught that flicker in his eyes, recognition, maybe surprise, and stepped out slowly, letting the crisp autumn air hit my face. Inside, I spotted my daughter. Her smile was strained. She looked me up and down, like she was checking if I'd passed some invisible inspection. Her husband gave me a quick nod, the kind you give to someone you're not sure you want people to know you're related to. Then I met him, her father-in-law, the man whose approval she clearly valued more than mine. He had that effortless smugness that only comes from generations of money and 0 days of real work. His handshake was limp, his eyes scanning me like I was an auction item he wasn't interested in bidding on. "Nice to finally meet you," he said, like he was humoring a salesman. I didn't flinch. I just smiled and said, "Likewise. I've heard so much about you." And I had, none of it flattering. I could already feel the tension in the room. I hadn't even made it to the main hall yet, and I knew exactly what kind of night this was going to be. And here's the thing, that was fine, because I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to make a statement they'd never forget. From the moment I stepped into that main hall, I could feel the temperature drop, not literally, but in the way people glanced at me. It wasn't curiosity. It was that subtle, polite skin people give when they're trying to place you in their social hierarchy. Some nodded faintly. Others didn't bother. My daughter stayed close enough to acknowledge me, but not close enough for anyone to mistake me as part of her main group. The place reeked of old money, dark wood walls, oil paintings of men who had probably never dirtied their hands, crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling. And right there, in the middle of it all, my daughter's father-in-law was holding court, surrounded by people hanging on his every word like he was dispensing gospel. I moved toward the refreshment table, trying to give her space. The waiter poured me a drink with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's when I caught my daughter glancing over at me, not in a warm, proud way. It was the quick look you give when you're checking to see if the guest is behaving. I can handle a lot. I've been underestimated before. But seeing my own daughter so worried about my fit in this room, that stung deeper than any snide remark from a stranger. Her husband drifted over briefly, murmured something about keeping things casual tonight, and then disappeared back to the cluster of his family. It was clear I was here physically, but socially, I might as well have been standing in the parking lot. I tried striking up a conversation with a man about my age, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. We exchanged the usual small talk, weather, the upcoming fundraiser, until I mentioned my service in the military. His polite smile faltered just enough for me to catch it. "Oh, that's admirable," he said, with the tone of someone talking to a child showing off a crayon drawing. Then he excused himself to get another drink. Fine, let them circle their wagons. I wasn't here for their approval. Still, I couldn't ignore the way the whispers started when I walked past certain groups. I knew they weren't saying anything directly. These people were too refined for open insults, but their eyes said enough. And the worst part? My daughter wasn't shutting any of it down. She wasn't defending me. She was avoiding the situation entirely, like my presence was a social inconvenience. When the first part of the evening's program was announced, a casual meet and mingle before the speeches, she made her way to her father-in-law's side. He leaned down to say something in her ear, and I swear I saw the corners of her mouth twitch into a suppressed smile. I wasn't naive. I knew that whatever he said was about me. And instead of rolling her eyes or brushing it off, she let it happen. So I stayed on the edges of the crowd, taking everything in. Every smirk, every side-eye, every time someone politely drifted away when I joined a conversation. I was cataloging it all, not out of bitterness, though I won't lie, there was plenty of that, but because I could feel something taking shape in my mind. You don't spend a lifetime overcoming challenges just to get taken out by a few smug looks and whispers. If they wanted to treat me like an outsider, I'd let them, for now. Because the thing about being underestimated, it gives you all the room in the world to plan. And standing there in that overpriced hall, surrounded by people who thought their pedigree made them untouchable, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wouldn't be the last time they saw me here. But the next time, the room would look very different. They called my name sooner than I expected. I'd been standing near the back, half listening to the club president's warm-up speech about tradition and community. But when I heard, "And now, let's honor the man whose generosity has made this new Veterans Pavilion possible," I knew it was my cue. The applause started before I even moved. Real applause, not the polite, golf clap variety they'd been giving to the other speakers. This was louder, warmer. People actually turned to look for me. I stepped out from the shadows, walking toward the small stage they'd set up in the corner of the hall. The chandelier light hit me like a spotlight, and I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Some were smiling. Some just looked curious. And then, there was my daughter and her father-in-law. Her expression froze somewhere between surprise and discomfort. His lips twitched into the kind of half-smile that says, "Let's get this over with." The club president went on about my service record, the tours overseas, the commendations, and then shifted to my civilian life. The businesses I'd built from scratch, the years of funding for veterans programs, the personal visits I'd made to rehab centers, things I'd done quietly, without press or publicity. I caught a few people in the crowd actually leaning forward. Meanwhile, my daughter's husband stared at the floor, and her father-in-law adjusted his cufflinks like he was waiting for a waiter to refill his wine. When they unveiled the plaque, my name engraved in brass, mounted on polished oak, the room erupted again. Cameras flashed. A few vets in the crowd even stood and saluted. That's when I saw it. The father-in-law's jaw tightened. He dabbed at his mouth with a linen napkin, as if trying to wipe away the taste of having to clap for me. I kept my speech short. Just a few words about service, sacrifice, and the importance of community beyond social circles or wealth. But I made sure to look directly at my daughter when I said, "It's not where you come from that defines you. It's what you're willing to give." Her eyes flickered. She glanced away almost immediately. After I stepped down, there was a rush of handshakes. People I'd never met wanted to thank me, asked me about my work, share stories about their own relatives in the service. For a moment, it felt like maybe this night could turn around. But the bubble burst as soon as I rejoined my daughter's main group. "Well," her father-in-law said, swirling his wine. That was very heartfelt. His tone dripped with that false sweetness people use when they're being polite because they have to be. "Dad, you didn't tell me they were going to make such a big deal about you," my daughter added, her smile tight. "Oh, I didn't know I had to ask permission," I said lightly, but my eyes didn't leave hers. She laughed, too quickly, and changed the subject. I let it slide for now. But inside, the message was clear. No matter what I'd just accomplished, I wasn't getting an ounce of genuine respect from this side of the family. That was fine. Respect can't be demanded, but it can be earned or taken, and they were about to learn the difference. I wasn't planning to overhear it. After my speech, I'd stepped outside to get some air. The club's terrace overlooked the golf course, the kind of manicured perfection that costs a fortune to maintain. I was just letting the night breeze clear my head when I realized I'd left my jacket on the back of my chair inside. On my way back in, I passed the hallway that led to the private lounge, the one for members only. The door was cracked open just enough for voices to spill out, and I knew one of them instantly. "My daughter." "He tries," she was saying, her voice low but clear enough to cut right through me. "But it's just different. This isn't his world." There was a pause, and then her father-in-law's voice, smooth, dripping with false sympathy. "You can take the man out of his element, but you can't take, well, you know." He let the sentence hang, and they both laughed. Not loud, but enough to twist in my gut like a knife. "I just don't want him to feel uncomfortable," my daughter continued. "Or make anyone else uncomfortable." Anyone else. That's what I was to her now, someone who might make people uncomfortable. I stood there, every instinct telling me to walk in and confront them. But years of discipline, military and otherwise, kept me still. If I stormed in now, it would turn into a scene, and they'd win. They'd paint me as the emotional, overreacting outsider who couldn't handle a little teasing. No, better to stay quiet. Listen, learn. They went on, the conversation meandering into talk of upcoming club events, investments, vacations. But the damage was already done. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. The casual way my own daughter spoke about me like I was an old, slightly embarrassing neighbor, tolerated, but not truly welcome. I slipped away before they came out, retrieved my jacket, and returned to the terrace. My drink was still where I'd left it, beads of condensation sliding down the glass. I picked it up and took a slow sip, staring out into the dark. The thing about betrayal, especially from family, is that it doesn't just hurt. It reshapes you. You start seeing every past interaction through a new lens, realizing maybe it wasn't as innocent as you thought. The subtle glances, the awkward silences, the times she forgot to invite me to certain gatherings. It all made sense now. I finished my drink and made my way back inside, wearing the same neutral expression I'd had all night. No one would know what I'd heard. Not yet. Because now, I wasn't just attending an event. I was starting a countdown. A countdown to the day I'd walk into this same club, look every one of them in the eye, my daughter included, and show them exactly who they'd underestimated. The morning after the event, I woke up with the same hollow feeling in my chest I'd gone to bed with. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and replayed the night over and over. Not just the look in my daughter's eyes, but the exact phrasing of her words in that lounge. Different world. Not his place. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. That wasn't going to fade. And I knew. The only way to deal with this was to take the fight to the ground they thought they owned. I started with the obvious. A man like her father-in-law doesn't exist in a vacuum. Old money always comes with old rivalries, whispered scandals, and a list of people who'd love to see the mighty stumble. I just had to find them. I called an old friend from my service days, Jake. These days he ran a private security firm that, among other things, did background research for high-profile clients. Discreetly. "Need you to run a quiet check on a guy," I told him. "Name's Richard Whitmore. Lives in the Brookstone Estates, big in the country club scene." Jake chuckled. "You're not joining their golf team, are you?" "Not exactly," I said. "Let's just call it curiosity." Within a week, Jake's first report landed in my inbox. Richard's empire was a patchwork of investments, commercial real estate, luxury imports, and a stake in a high-end wine distribution company. The money was real, but so were the weak points. A recent land deal had gone sour, leaving him in a quiet feud with another prominent family. And the wine business? Let's just say certain premium imports were skirting dangerously close to regulatory trouble. It was a start. I didn't stop there. I attended a few public charity events in the area, the kind Richard wouldn't bother noticing. I mingled, asked harmless questions, and listened. People talk when they think you're just being polite. And what I learned painted a clearer picture. Richard's influence in the club wasn't just about wealth. It was about control. He brokered introductions, decided who got into certain circles, and, in subtle ways, reminded everyone exactly where they stood. Perfect. Because the higher someone stands, the harder they fall when the ground shifts beneath them. But this wasn't going to be a frontal assault. That's how amateurs operate. Quick, loud, messy. I wanted precision. I wanted him to feel the shift without even realizing who started it. And I wanted my daughter to see every second of it, not out of spite alone, but so she'd understand exactly who her father really was. One night, sitting in my office, I pulled out a legal pad and started mapping it out. Connections, weaknesses, opportunities. I circled the wine business in red, too much potential there to ignore. Then I drew a line to the rival family. If I could align myself with them publicly, even just in small, seemingly unrelated ways, it would force Richard into situations he couldn't control without losing face. By the time I put my pen down, I had the skeleton of something bigger. This wouldn't just be about payback. This was about walking into that club one day and making Richard Whitmore, and everyone like him, realize that different world, or not, I could own the room if I wanted to. And when that day came, my daughter wouldn't just be watching. She'd have a front row seat. The first step was subtlety. If I came at Richard Whitmore head on, he'd see it coming a mile away. Men like him were used to petty confrontations. They'd built entire defenses for them. But subtle pressure? The kind that doesn't feel like an attack until it's too late? That's a language they're not fluent in. I started with the rival family, the Crawfords. Wealthy in their own right, but new money compared to the Whitmores. That alone was enough to make them natural enemies. They owned a chain of boutique hotels, sponsored high-profile charity galas, and, as luck would have it, were looking for a cause that would play well with the public. I attended one of their fundraisers, a black-tie dinner downtown. I wasn't on the guest list, but that didn't matter. A quick call to one of my contacts in the Veterans Network got me in as an honored community donor. I showed up in the same sharp suit I'd worn to the country club, not to blend in, but to stand out just enough to be memorable. When I introduced myself to Charles Crawford, the patriarch, I could tell he'd done his homework on people like me. Military background, business success, charitable work. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Within minutes we were trading stories about service, leadership, and the hypocrisy of certain exclusive circles. I didn't mention Richard by name. I didn't have to. By the end of the night, I'd secured an invitation to a private luncheon with Charles and his wife, Diane. From there, it was easy to steer the conversation toward potential collaborations. A joint veterans initiative, perhaps, one that would require venue space for high-profile events. Charles loved the idea. I knew exactly which venue he'd want. The country club. The trick was making it seem like it was his idea, not mine. So I kept my tone casual, talking about how community partnerships were the future of public engagement. All the while, I could picture Richard's face when he'd be told the Crawfords wanted to co-host a major charity event on his home turf. Meanwhile, I started making small but visible appearances at the club itself. Not as a guest of my daughter. I didn't need her escort, but through other members I'd met over the years. I played a few rounds of golf, had lunch on the patio, nodded politely to people who'd ignored me before. Word spreads fast in places like that, and soon it was impossible to pretend I wasn't part of the landscape. I also began quietly supporting causes that Richard's inner circle either opposed or ignored. A scholarship fund for the children of service workers. Sponsorship of a local small business expo. All things that earned me goodwill in the community while making Richard's brand of elitism look out of touch. Every move I made was deliberate, but nothing could be traced back to malice. On the surface, I was just a man expanding his philanthropic reach. Underneath, I was repositioning the chessboard, piece by piece, until Richard's king was exposed and immobile. And through it all, I kept one thought in mind. This wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about forcing my daughter to see, in full daylight, that her father didn't need anyone's permission to belong anywhere. Because when the final move came, it wouldn't just be checkmate for Richard Whitmore. It would be a revelation for her. It started with a small article in the Brookstone Gazette. Local veteran philanthropist partners with Crawford family for major fundraising event. Nothing too flashy. A 2-page spread in the community section with a photo of me shaking hands with Charles Crawford in front of a mock-up of the event poster. I knew Richard read that paper. Everyone at the club did. But I also knew this was just the spark. The fire was coming. Within 2 weeks, the Crawfords went public with the full details. The event would be a high-profile charity gala benefiting veteran housing programs, co-hosted at, of all places, the country club. Charles insisted on it during planning, and by now, Richard had no polite way to say no without looking like he was against veterans. The local TV station picked it up next. Then a regional business magazine. My face started showing up in places Richard couldn't avoid. News feeds, email newsletters, even a glossy flyer pinned to the club's notice board. And every time, the headline was some variation of the same theme. Community leaders join forces to support veterans. Funny thing, my name was always first. At first, I played it cool. Whenever I saw Richard at the club, I'd greet him with the same polite nod, as if nothing was happening. But I could see it in his eyes, the stiffness in his jaw, the way he adjusted his tie when I walked past. He hated it. He hated that this was happening in his house, and there was nothing he could do to shut it down. One afternoon, I was having coffee on the patio with Charles and Diane Crawford when Richard walked by. Charles, bless him, waved him over. Richard, have you met Jack? He's the man making this whole gala possible. Richard's smile was so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Oh, we've met, he said. Quite an ambitious project. Ambitious gets results, I replied, holding his gaze. Besides, it's for the right cause. You can't argue with that. He didn't. He just gave a thin smile and excused himself. Behind the scenes, I kept building momentum. I arranged for the gala to feature not just speeches and dinner, but a silent auction with items donated by prominent local businesses, several of which were old club members Richard had alienated over the years. They were more than happy to contribute once they learned it would put them in the Crawfords' good graces and, by extension, mine. Every move was layered. It wasn't just about publicity. It was about creating alliances, building a network inside the club that didn't rely on Richard's approval. The more people who owed me a favor, the less control he had. And I could feel it, the shift. People who'd barely acknowledged me before were suddenly greeting me first, asking about the event, offering to help. My presence in the club was no longer an oddity. It was becoming normal. Richard could see it too. Which is why, one evening, I caught him watching me from across the lounge, not with contempt this time, but with calculation. He was trying to figure out my endgame. Good. Let him wonder. Because the truth was, the gala wasn't the endgame. It was just the next step toward a much bigger checkmate. The night of the gala was still a week away, but the pressure was already visible. At the club, whispers followed Richard like a shadow. Some were subtle, a polite nod here, a forced smile there, but others weren't even trying to hide. Members who used to cling to his every word were now splitting their time between his table and mine. I could see it driving him crazy. The man thrived on control, on being the unchallenged center of gravity in any room. And now, for the first time in years, he wasn't. The real turning point came at a Thursday luncheon, a casual weekly gathering for core members. I'd been invited by Charles Crawford, which meant Richard couldn't openly object without making a scene. Halfway through, a reporter from the Brookstone Gazette walked in. She was there to do a light feature on the upcoming gala, and she wanted a few photos. Charles made sure I was front and center in every shot. Richard? He ended up 2 seats away, half out of frame. When the reporter asked for a group picture with the event hosts, Charles put an arm around my shoulder and said, "Jack here is the driving force behind this whole thing." Richard laughed, short, brittle, and muttered something about team effort, but the damage was done. Every camera flash felt like another brick pulled from the foundation of his authority. That afternoon, the photos went up on the club's official Facebook page. My name tagged. My quote about opening doors and making the club a true community hub highlighted in bold. Richard wasn't quoted at all. By Friday, people were talking. Not in whispers anymore, in open conversations over drinks and dinner. Some loved the change, saying the club needed fresh energy. Others were cautious but curious. Either way, the balance had shifted. The best moment came that weekend. I was at the club's bar, talking with two members about veteran housing projects, when Richard walked in. Normally, the crowd would part for him without a second thought. This time, they didn't move. He had to weave between conversations, nodding to people who were too busy talking to look up. He ordered a drink and stood at the far end of the bar, alone. That was new. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The silence around him spoke louder than anything I could say. Later, as I was leaving, I passed him in the hallway. He stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "You've been busy," he said, the words tight. "Just doing my part," I replied. "For the right cause." Our eyes locked for a moment. And in his, I didn't just see irritation anymore. I saw calculation turning into desperation. He was realizing this wasn't a passing wave. This was a tide he couldn't turn back. I walked out of the club that night knowing exactly what Part 9 would be, the checkmate. The night of the gala had finally arrived. The country club had never looked like this. Banners for the veterans' cause draped over the entrance, photographers clustered near the red carpet, and a steady flow of high-profile guests stepping out of luxury cars. This wasn't just another club dinner. This was the event of the season, and everyone knew my name was tied to it. I arrived early, not to micromanage, but to watch. Every detail was perfect. The Crawfords had spared no expense. Live music, gourmet catering, auction tables lined with donations from half the city's top businesses. And at the center of it all, my name and Charles Crawford's printed side by side on every program. Richard arrived 20 minutes later, his wife on his arm, his smile already tight. He made the rounds, shaking hands. But I could see it. He wasn't leading the room. He was following it. People's attention shifted toward me as I moved, like gravity had been redirected. When it was time for the speeches, Charles took the podium first. He thanked the sponsors, praised the club for hosting, and then turned to me. "Now," he said, "I'd like to introduce the man without whom this event would never have been possible, a man whose dedication to our veterans goes beyond words." The applause was instant, loud, and it didn't fade when I stepped up. I could see my daughter in the crowd, her eyes fixed on me, not smiling, but watching. I kept my speech short, but I made every word count. I spoke about service, about the bonds forged in hardship, about what real community means. Then I turned the focus. It's easy to support something when it's convenient. But true character shows when you put others first, even when it costs you. Tonight isn't just about raising funds. It's about raising standards. And I believe this club is ready for that. There was a ripple through the crowd. I didn't name Richard, but I didn't have to. Everyone knew who had fought this event behind the scenes. And then came the move I'd been saving. I announced that the funds raised tonight had already exceeded expectations, thanks to a surprise donation from the Crawfords and several other members. On cue, the lights shifted to a large presentation check, with a list of major donors printed beside it. Richard's name was conspicuously absent. The cameras caught it. So did every single pair of eyes in the room. I let the silence linger just long enough before adding, "I'm proud to stand with those who lead by example." The applause was deafening. Some stood. My daughter's gaze darted to Richard, then back to me. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't look away. Afterward, people swarmed the auction tables, the bar, the dance floor. Richard? He stayed at his table, locked in polite conversation with a couple who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. He didn't approach me once. When the night ended, I walked out through the main doors, past the photographers, the reporters, and the buzzing guests. My daughter stood near the exit. We locked eyes. She didn't speak, but for the first time in years, there was no trace of embarrassment in her face. Only something closer to recognition. Checkmate. The Monday after the gala, the country club's newsletter went out. Front page. A photo of me and Charles Crawford holding the ceremonial check, smiling under the banner for veteran housing. The headline read, "Record-breaking gala raises funds for local heroes." Richard's name wasn't mentioned until the third paragraph, and even then, it was buried in a list of attendees. By midweek, word had spread beyond the club. Local radio shows were talking about the event, praising the refreshing leadership that made it possible. The Crawfords hotels were running a small veterans discount promo, citing the gala's success. My inbox was full of invitations, board positions, speaking engagements, more collaboration offers than I could handle. And Richard? He'd gone quiet. No snide remarks, no sideways looks. Just absence. He skipped the Thursday luncheon entirely. Rumor was he'd taken a personal break from the club. I didn't gloat. That's not my style. This was never about shouting victory from the rooftops. It was about changing the balance. And that balance had shifted for good. I wasn't the outsider anymore. If anything, I was now the face of what the club could be if it let go of its old habits. My daughter didn't call right away. But 2 weeks later, she invited me to lunch. No agenda, no half-baked excuses, just lunch. She asked about the gala, about the people I'd met, about my plans for the next year. And when the check came, she looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But it was something real. And for now, that was enough. I learned something through all of this. Sometimes you don't need to kick down the door. Sometimes you just need to rearrange the room until people have no choice but to see you differently. Richard Whitmore may never like me. That's fine. He doesn't have to. But he'll remember me. And so will everyone else. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more gripping tales like this one. Hit that like button and drop a comment. Did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place?